what's up? Welcome in. Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, GC Live. Hope everybody had a great 4th of July as we roll ever closer to college football 2024. SEC Media Days next week, and then we hopefully, are y'all losing me already, Chris? We're
I lost you momentarily.
Maybe this internet connection has had too long of a break. It's not. It's struggling to get back into the groove here, I guess. But this is GC Live. He's Chris. I'm Wes, and we actually do have a lot to get to, even though it is a little bit of a dead time right now. But for the most part, still stuff going on. And Chris, for South Carolina, adding commitments to this 2025 class and losing a big one in Shamari Earls, 4-star cornerback, who officially flips to Georgia over the weekend. Let's start with the positive first. Jaiden Braker, a guy we really had anticipated was going to be in South Carolina's class, and someone we've been tracking for a couple months now, took that official visit in early June. Did want to kind of go through the process, but we've reported for some time this was going to be a big linebacker class. They obviously lose several guys who are upperclassmen from this current crop that will be moving on after this season. And they've gone a little bit old school and wanting to go the high school route at this position. And we'll get into the class as a whole. But first of all, Braker commits to Shane Beamer on July 4th, goes public over the weekend, and gives South Carolina another really athletic, long, twitchy, sort of just that raw guy that can run that I think South Carolina has been focused on at that position so far.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the and I know we'll get into Braker individually too, Wes, but I want to take just kind of like a bigger picture overview of the linebacker class. A lot of traits in this class, and let's for a moment toss aside the whole star thing for just a minute, right? Because On Three is in the midst of doing another rankings update. They just redid a bunch of the top guys. I think I don't remember exactly how many they did today, Wes, but they're working through that, and they will have another rankings update. That's really their biggest one, according to our friend Charles Power, who's their director of scouting and rankings. Their biggest one will be after the senior season, right? So if you're someone that says, well, I don't believe in rankings being updated based on summer camps, not all kids go to camps, et cetera, I get it. Charles and his team do a really good job of using as much data as they possibly have. But all these guys are going to play a senior football season, barring injury too. And so maybe there's some time for some of these rankings to be adjusted, right? But when you look at this class as a whole, at linebacker, it's traits. I mean, you've got Jaquel Holman at, 6'1" or 6'2", 200 pounds, and the frame to get a lot bigger. Tayshawn Austin, who's 6'4" and 225, 230, Wes. You got Braker at over 6'2", almost 6'3", 210 or bigger. You got AJ Holloway, who's the most physically ready, I think, looking when it's 6'3", 225. And of course, South Carolina wants to land another high school linebacker even in this class. So you don't look at this group and see a bunch of small guys where you're like, I wonder if he'll be big enough to play at the SEC level. You certainly don't see that here, right? You see guys that, have length, have size, have frames, and have versatility, which in a way I think kind of mirrors what they have on the current linebacker roster in terms of experience and just some of the versatility.
Yeah, and I think in addition to the size, a lot of these guys can run, which, I think that was something last year with South Carolina's linebacking core. People talked about a lot. Like, were they quick enough? Were they fast enough? I think we've seen them upgrade the speed in that room. That's something we talked about this last portal cycle, is that was a huge focus for them to add speed. They did that with, you look at Demetrius Knight, you look at that Bengali Kamara, adding them to the mix. They did that. J.R. Johnson, a speedy guy who they added as a freshman high school guy this past class. And then this group, for the most part, brings that to the table. Getting into Jaiden Braker, this is a kid that ran a 4.52 40-yard dash, 6'3", is closing in on 220 pounds himself and kind of does favor a little bit, a J.R. Johnson at the same point in the process. You look at his recruitment. NC State was heavily involved. They offered, took the OV there. Kentucky got involved, took the OV there. There were a couple other schools, Chris, that I think probably you would say, at least on paper, it was going to be hard for them to beat out a South Carolina, like a Rutgers, a Utah within this one. It felt to me like NC State and Kentucky had emerged just on paper as the two schools who could maybe give you a run. I do think that those are also two schools that have evaluated very well as far as just prospects in general. Certainly on the defensive side, you look at Kentucky through the, I guess what, man, like a decade now that they've consistently, they've gone that same route of going with traits and saying we can develop guys. And, I think this is a kid who has what you're looking for physically. And it is going to be about development for him once he gets to South Carolina. But someone that they got in on in April, he was in for an unofficial visit. I understand both sides kind of just connected instantly. I've also heard, great character kid, great character family, just in terms of being about all the right things, which I think has been a trend in this linebacker class as well. So with Braker, I think with all these guys, depending on how, and I don't want to just blindly do whenever there's a 3-star commit, people do is there a chance they can move up to 4 stars? There's always a chance, right? I think with several of these guys, we'll get to Jaquel Holman, who there's already been some movement, but with several of these guys who are in this class right now or could be added to the class, we'll get to one more linebacker they're chasing there as well. Because of that upside, if they continue to make strides on the field this season, because they already checked those boxes from an athletic standpoint, there could be some upward momentum, some upward movement in the rankings as those senior years play out. We saw that very thing with J.R. Johnson this past season.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because we know how, data-driven On3 and Charles and those guys are. I mean, they really do, I think, a really good job of – do they bat 1,000? Nobody in the world does, right? But I think they do a really good job of taking every single possible data point, every eyeball test, everything that you can have that's available to scout prospects and try to use it, And so when you look at guys like Jaiden Braker who have traits that can translate to the next level, and then honestly, Wes, traits that could potentially translate to the pro level, On3 mirrors the first round of the NFL draft. They have 32 5-stars at the end of the process, 32 first-round picks in the NFL draft. So they try to line that up, and pro potential, in addition to, of course, college potential, is a part of that rankings equation. How good of a shot does a guy have to go to the college level and make a big impact? And if he does that, can he go and make a potential impact at the pro level, become an NFL draft pick? I said this on the takeover hour on the game on the radio today. Sometimes you would look back at linebacker classes for USC and you would not see a lot of size, right? You would see good high school players, but maybe some guys that you looked at and wondered how well it may translate to A, college, but B, to the pros. Well, when you look at someone like Jaiden Braker, you don't look at him and say, well, I don't really know if he's long enough. I don't really know if he has the frame, because he's 6'3", he's 220, he's got the frame to get bigger. You look at how he's listed in high school. If you go watch his film, he's listed as an edge / linebacker and does some of both at that level. So he, like J.R. Johnson, brings some of that versatility to the game. So he kind of checks those boxes that you look for as far as a trait. So when you have someone like him, as opposed to maybe a guy who's just, 6'1", 190 with more limited athleticism, somebody like Braker is going to have a better chance to move up if, like you said, Wes, the production starts matching up even more with that potential.
Yeah, and speaking of traits, shout out to our guy, Jaquavius Dodd, who is just threw a shout out in the comments. What's up, Jaquavis? Hope you're doing well, man. Committed to South Carolina last month. Big time edge guy, defensive end, pass rusher here in the state of South Carolina. Appreciate you joining in, man. And so as you sort of look at this linebacker class, you do have some different skill sets among that group. But also, Chris, I think there are similarities across the board as well. And, one guy who just did already get that bump, and that there were maybe some signs of this as well. We already, when Jaquel Holman committed to South Carolina, we had some details from Charles Power that we had posted on Gamecock Central. And Charles really, really high on this kid and really high on his upside. Even compared him a little bit, different position, obviously, but to a Xavier Luedecke in high school. And just that this is a big, twitchy kid who is just going to need to develop at a particular position once he gets to college. Currently at a smaller school, currently kind of a do-it-all, do everything. It's going to play offense, it's going to play defense, it's going to play special teams. When you get into college, you can specialize a little bit more. You can focus on really the intricacies of developing at that particular position. For Holman, even in that case, in that sense, there has been a question of, all right, is he a safety? Is he a linebacker? I'm not so sure he couldn't play running back. He rushed for over 1,000 yards at running back in high school. For South Carolina right now, the plan, the focus has been for him to play linebacker. So with that said, you have 4 linebacker commits in this class. And when you look at Holman, when you look at all the potential he has, that's a big reason why I'm sure he has been moved up to 4-star status on the On3 rankings as those updates came out today. Now the number 231 overall prospect in the country, the number 21 linebacker in the country, and number 5 prospect in the state of South Carolina, Chris, is Jaquel Holman.
Yeah, that big move up for him, right? And again, to kind of shout out Charles and On3, I think a really good eval and recognition by them, because this is a guy that, plays at a smaller school in the state of South Carolina. A lot of times those are the kind of guys that get overlooked. I mean, Xavier Luedecke was a guy that had some good offers, but was certainly not ranked in the top 231 or anything like that coming out of high school. But this is a guy that has the size. I think you make some great points about him being raw, but being able to specialize at the next level and really come into his own. But another guy where the athletic traits are there. This is a kid who won 3 state championships in track and field in high school in his first year of high school track and field. So you keep looking at it, Wes, and this is a guy that you've seen the growth and the trajectory athletically, even at the high school level. He's not topped out. He's not maxed out. And I think if you take that size, those traits, that raw, still somewhat raw potential and ability on the football field, you can start to imagine what he could be at the college level. Will he have, maybe a little bit more of a adjustment playing linebacker at the SEC level than, say, AJ Holloway, who plays major Georgia football and is a linebacker and is already 6'3", 225 at the high school level? Yeah, probably so. But also, does he have arguably even more potential? Yes, you could also say that too.
Yeah, I think when you start to look at all these guys, man, you mentioned Holloway. This is a kid who, in terms of just being most ready to play right away, he's probably the guy. I mean, I was told, like you said, listed 225. He's probably already closer to 230. Is someone who is has access to a great training facility, great trainers. Is already developed as a linebacker prospect. So in terms of playing right away, in terms of being like kind of that traditional middle linebacker type, I think it's Holloway. I think after you get past Holloway, there are some similarities with the other guys. Like you look at Holman, you look at Braker, you look at Tayshawn Austin. Now, I think Tayshawn Austin of the group is maybe the most likely to potentially grow into an edge guy when you just look at his length, the fact that he already does have some weight on him. Now, they firmly believe he can be a linebacker and be a true linebacker who then maybe you use off the edge rushing as well. So I think you sort of look at it, again, Holloway, sort of middle linebacker. Tayshawn Austin could be an outside linebacker, but could ultimately develop into an edge guy, or could be sort of a versatile guy. You move back and forth between the two, depending on down and distance. I think you then look at Braker. He's probably more maybe kind of like a Bam Martin Scott in that he could be a Sam Will type, but his athletic has been compared to J.R. Johnson. And then I think Holman, who is the smallest of the group, but supreme athlete, he's about 200 pounds right now. So could he potentially be more of like an in the box safety or a nickel, even like a big nickel type guy potentially, or he continues to put on weight, which the thing with him, he is coming from a small school. He's coming from a place that maybe doesn't have quite as many resources in terms of the weight program there. I think there's a good chance Holman's one of those guys that could get to school and put on 15 pounds just kind of instantaneously once he gets into an SEC strength conditioning and nutrition program. So, but all these guys have some similarities, but all these guys also have some different things that sort of lets them slot at different positions. And as you said, that's something that has been mentioned to us about this current group on campus. South Carolina has some versatility among this linebacker group. There's a reason why I think it's twofold. The reason why they're going to be going to some 4.25 and 3.35 is the addition of talent at that edge spot. If we're looking at just this current season, so the addition of talent of that, I think if not for the addition of talent at edge, this may be a 3.35 base defense. Like that might be what they are. But then you look at the other side of that, the skill sets, the versatility they have at linebacker has led them to sort of dive deeper into this idea of playing more 3-3-5.
Yeah, it is good to have options. It's good to be able to match up, based on what you think you may get out of an opponent, and to be able to present some different looks. And certainly when South Carolina went to the 3-3-5 defense, they did a lot more of it in the month of November last year. And I don't think it was any coincidence that they began to play a lot better. Now, teams will be prepared for it this year. They'll have scouted it pretty extensively. But it was effective. It will give South Carolina a different look, a change up of sorts. And it kind of does play to their personnel. When South Carolina played Bam Martin Scott more and played Jaron Willis, has kind of gone under discussed, Wes, as a linebacker on this team. He did some really good things, especially rushing the passer last year. When you look at the depth that they have assembled at linebacker, it does make a lot of sense to feature that. At the same time, you don't have to exclusively be that if you don't want, because they have bolstered the edge core by getting Gilbert Edmond back, by landing Kyle Kennard out of the portal, and of course Dylan Stewart, who's scheduled to play a pretty big role as a true freshman as well. So, they have gotten better, they've gotten deeper there, they've gotten more athletic, they've gotten more versatile, and I think that'll help them defensively on the whole. This is a defense that I think everybody knows needs to take a step forward. But I've sensed, Wes, that people are starting to come around to the idea of the defense like being expected to take a step forward, not just needing, but there being the expectation of this defense playing better. I think I said this earlier, even in this show, the linebacker group that they're putting together in this cycle, while it may not be gaudy in terms of star power, I think you can look at it and start to match up what they have already done on the roster. A roster which, by the way, Wes, doesn't feature a whole bunch of super highly recruited guys. The two true freshmen, J.R. Johnson and Wendell Gregory, were 4-star guys. Mm-hmm. The rest of this bunch, not big-time recruits out of high school, but still have a chance to be very good players or already are very good players.
Yeah, and I mean, even J.R. Johnson, 4-star guy by the end, but when South Carolina took him, that was not the case at all. So, his recruitment wasn't necessarily one of these. Now, Wendell Gregory's was kind of a big boy battle there at the beginning, and it was an early commit to South Carolina. J.R., more of a camp find, who the word got out about him as he transitioned from wide receiver to linebacker. And so, yeah, that's going to be a fun group to watch. Now, I think Jaron Willis is probably, my impression, getting quite a bit of a push from J.R. Johnson. You look at kind of Bam Martin Scott's going to play. Like, he's going to be out there. He's going to be on the field. So who's next up after him, replacing his skill set as the backup? I think Willis and J.R. Johnson probably fighting for playing time within how South Carolina is going to structure that linebacking core. And going to be some guys, I think it goes both ways. There's probably going to be some guys in that room who don't play as much as they don't play as much as they maybe think they should. On the other side, the other hand, you would think and hope for once, for the first time in a while, that they're going to feel pretty good about rotating guys in and feeling fresh and stuff like this. I think that goes largely, like, it's talked about, Chris, but I don't know if it's mentioned enough just how much more difficult it is to perform if you're fatigued. And you can kind of get in shape and you can be in the best shape in the world, but if you are, like, everybody has a limit, and if you're fatigued, that's gonna show up in the fourth quarter. And so I think for South Carolina, having some of that depth across the front six, front seven, whatever you want to call it, having that depth is going to be huge for them going into this season. And it's something I don't think they've necessarily had. And that extends into, I think, frankly, now the edge room to of course, the interior defensive line and then the linebackers as well. There are some questions once you start to get into the secondary as far as how that may play out. But for the most part, that front group, you do have depth for the first time in a long time. Like I mentioned, Chris, 4 linebackers committed currently. They want to bring in 5. Donovan Darden, Havelock, linebacker, another NC State battle there. Feel pretty good about where South Carolina stands right now, so he would potentially be the 5th. And, man, I would say a little bit of an old school approach on that position as opposed to just saying, we'll hit it in the portal. We'll bring in a couple portal guys. They clearly, now granted, they did bring in 2 portal guys this last cycle, but they clearly want to build the fabric of that room with some traditional high school recruiting.
That's what I'm fascinated to see, Wes. Do they end up taking a portal player at linebacker? It's to be determined, maybe. I know you've said that you think it's very possible that they do, or even probable. But they have certainly built this class on high school recruiting. And I think if you asked most coaches, and Shane Beamer's addressed this himself, you do want to continue building your program, or not continue. You want to build your program on high school recruiting at the end of the day. The portal has been very good for South Carolina. I think until South Carolina can take that next step as a program, if they do, they will need to probably be more reliant on the portal than some other programs, right? Some more established programs, programs that are in the college football playoff on a near annual basis can be a lot more choosy. They might can say, we lost our starting safety. A guy who we think's the best safety in the country is in the portal. Let's go try to get him. Other schools like South Carolina may have more needs here and there, and that's when the portal becomes a great resource. But if you can attract top talent from high school, or make very good evaluations on high school talent, bring them in, develop them in your program for multiple years, and then, of course, be able to retain them so you're not just training them and sending them to another program, that's an ideal scenario. And so that does seem to be a lot of the approach here at linebacker.
Yeah, no doubt. Austin Gardner asking, any idea when the Sunday welcome home will announce? I do not have specifics on that one. I do have a pretty good read on who it is at this point. I don't think it will be a long wait, but I do not have specifics on that either. So we certainly will post on Gamecock Central on the Insiders Forum if we do hear more. I hate putting out the timetables because they change so much, even when a guy knows where he's going. And sometimes it's as simple as he's waiting on a graphic, waiting on someone to send him what he needs to post everything. So, hey, how doesn't it seem like, Chris, the trend went from graphic to video back to graphic? Like how and why?
I don't know, man. Videos, I think a lot of them, they were just taking too long, probably.
Yeah.
It's a lot of trouble.
Even when there's a video, it's like nowadays the video is second to. It's like, oh, I committed. Here's a little background video. It's not the like, let me get a video announcing my commitment. It's like, oh, this is cool. This is when I committed, but you already know where I'm going. So
I think we should start a new trend, and everybody should announce on GC Live.
I'm yes,
because it's free. They don't have to pay a production company or anything like that. You just come on, announce. We normally have a pretty nice size audience here on GC Live. You don't even have to be going to South Carolina to do it. You can come on here and commit to another school even. I mean, obviously.
I was about to say, will that not be obvious where they're going if they come on here?
No, they can commit. Now, obviously, they would have to know 99.9% of the listeners would be very disappointed if they don't choose the Gamecocks. But, we'll welcome in fans of other schools temporarily on the program if they want to announce here. That's fine.
That would be pretty gutsy to go on here and commit to Clemson, I feel like.
Very gutsy. I mean, we would have to try to dramatize it a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, open invite to anybody listening, come announce on GC Live. You can do it.
Yeah, then if we got the non-Gamecocks on here, we could just tell them, hey, go to Clint Hammond, Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com. I didn't tell everyone today in the open like I'm supposed to, but hit them up, 803-422-6797. If you're in the market to buy a home, hit up Clint. Even if you're not in the market, but you just want to, maybe you don't have a feel at all for what that looks like, what a monthly payment might look like, or even what that process may look like. Clint, long time guy in the mortgage game. He's seen it all, ups, downs, everything in between. Awesome dude. He'll talk some Gamecocks with you while also walking you through the process of getting a mortgage here in the state of South Carolina or outside the state of South Carolina. So again, hit him up, 803-422-6797. Again, it's my good friend Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage. So Jaquavius Dodd says, I am committed to the University of South Carolina. Your first official announcement on GC. Welcome to the program, Jaquavius. Now we need to get him on here. Maybe we can set that up, man. We'll get you on as a guest here in the future. Just talking about your recruitment and talking about your time so far as a South Carolina commitment. But Chris, there was some bad news over the weekend for South Carolina and for Gamecock fans. It was expected, which I think that does make it probably a little bit more tolerable for fans, but still not fun for them. Shamari Earls decommits from South Carolina, commits to Georgia, and then just to pour salt directly into the wound, moves up in the On3 rankings today. Which just doesn't help us at all in terms of quelling the conspiracy theories about rankings.
Yeah, no doubt. But, in seriousness, well-deserved, I think, for him to move up because, as a prospect, he's pretty much got it all. Yeah, I mean, he's really, really, really good. And that's what makes it sting for Gamecock fans. And I think, there's a little bit of just like, okay, he flipped to Georgia. I don't even know if it stings as much because it's Georgia. Like if it were Clemson or even, some other school, people rightly recognize at this point that Shamari Earls is basically just drafted to play for Georgia at this point, as opposed to being recruited. They're just kind of like, no, we're drafting you. You have no choice. They're just kind of on another level right now. But it stings because this is a guy that I think you said earlier, Wes. He was kind of all Gamecock when he committed. It's a really good get for the staff because he's a really good player and out of an area in Virginia that's been very, very good to South Carolina. So it stings to lose him from the class. Your highest rated guy would have been an even higher rated guy, of course, if you would have kept him in the class. And so, yeah, that one hurt.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you look at that position. You know, Carolina has recruited. We've talked about this, and in the secondary, it's been this mix, right, of like highly recruited guys at DB, and then you look at like a Judge Collier who's in the mix to possibly start this year. Wasn't super highly recruited. South Carolina just had him at camp, liked him, evaluated him, offered, and now he's he played as a true freshman. Nicky Memori, who ended up being a 4-star guy on 3, that was not the case when South Carolina offered him. DQ Smith has developed after being a high school quarterback. So there's been a mix of like a Jalen Kilgore, who was very highly recruited and a great player in high school, a 4-star guy, but even kind of a borderline 4-star guy that we all kind of felt like was going to be a really good player. He's already proved that. So you don't want to go too far and say, they can't go find players like that because they've proved that they can. However, I don't want to sit here and tell fans they're wrong to be upset by losing out on someone like a Shamari Earls either, because he is, I mean, you want to talk about traits. He has he checks all the boxes for what you're looking for in a stud, true lockdown corner. And he has the length as well. He has the verified times in terms of track. And, I mean, Chris, if Georgia wants you, that honestly says something as well. So I think it's in a big picture standpoint, especially with the transfer portal where you can go fill needs elsewhere. You never ever get too caught up in the loss of one player. Like you just don't. But is it a loss? Is that a guy Carolina could have used? Is he a guy who probably you could project even as a high school recruit? This guy's probably a future starter at South Carolina. Like I don't think that's far-fetched at all. Now you're having to find a way, if you're really kind of doing your due diligence from a recruiting standpoint and looking ahead 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you're saying, all right, that's a spot we have to fill, whether that's a more developmental guy or whether that's in the future. To like 2 cycles from now, Chris, we may be talking about South Carolina landing a transfer portal cornerback, and you could be looking back on paper being like, well, that's the spot that Earls probably would have filled.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm not convicted of this, Wes. I'm workshopping it in my mind as I speak, but see if you agree or not. It's similar to offensive tackle in the portal in that it's a little bit harder to find a really good one. It's a more premium position at the pro level. And it's not running back where you're saying, I'm not getting the ball. It's not receiver where I don't like the offense. You're playing corner. Little bit different stylistically of a position. And a lot of times, if you're a junior corner, if you're good enough to go pro, you're going to go pro. Now there are some guys that will transfer. South Carolina, until OD Fortune definitely was coming back, they were in the market for a transfer portal cornerback last cycle, and they ended up looking at our guy Will Blanket Lee from Kansas State, and I can't remember where he ended up going, Wes. Maybe you remember.
Was it A&M, or am I making that up?
It might have been. I think it was A&M. So they looked at him for a while, right? But it's not like that. You just heard, here's 10 corners that they're looking at. There were some other spots like linebacker, for instance. You knew they were going to take a couple, and there were a lot of different guys on the board, and they ended up getting a couple good ones. I just feel like it's a little bit more of a premium position in the portal, and it's one where you would like to take high school guys and develop them in your program.
Yeah, I think, and I'm processing this on the fly too. I haven't really thought about that, but I think you're onto something, man. I think you can probably find okay corners in the portal, but can you find difference makers in the portal? Which I think, and again, there's always a projection when you're talking about a high school kid. Like, you're projecting out. There's no sure thing in terms of evaluation, but Earls pretty close to a sure thing, I think. And so he actually, in a lot of ways, Chris, Jalewis Solomon and Shamari Earls have some similarities to me in that they're both long, twitchy athletes that have verified speed and that also have had success playing wide receiver. So, I think these are two guys that you would have loved to be able to team up in your secondary if you're at South Carolina. I think Solomon a little bit bigger, just physically a little bit thicker than Earls is, I believe. But those are the type of guys, if you're going to I think this is why it burns too. You're trying to take the next step, right? Like, you're trying to take the next step as a program. Earls is the type of guy on paper that does that. And so when Georgia just comes in and says, we weren't even recruiting this guy as hard as you were or at all early on, and now we're just going to take him, that does burn. That stings a little bit if you're South Carolina. Now, can you go out, and they're not even the same exact position, but they are defensive backs. Can you finish this class with a Kendall Daniels? Can you go out and get, Laganza Hayward? I have no idea where that one's going to end up at this point. Like, that recruitment has been a little bit all over the place, I think. So we'll see what happens there. South Carolina was in great shape after the official visit. So I don't know where that recruitment is headed. South Carolina's in the game. Do you circle back to there's an in-state guy in JoJo Krim at Camden that a lot of people have opinions on and think that he's an SEC guy. As Travis says here, do you heat things up with Honest at Heathwood? There are lots of differing opinions on the cornerbacks in the state of South Carolina, I think. At one point, it looked like Honest was a mortal lock to UNC. For what I hear, that's not happening anymore. Maybe it's Tennessee, LSU involved there. But you have some options. I'll just be curious to see what direction South Carolina goes, Chris, in terms of, do they turn up the heat on somebody else, or do they a little bit take the route of, if we're unsure on a guy, do we just hang tight, go for those safeties I just mentioned, like a Daniels and a Hayward, and then circle back with the portal? A big part of this also will be the development this year, I feel like, of a Judge Collier, Vakari Swain, Emory Floyd, and Jalewis Solomon.
Yeah, great point. I can't add much to that. I think you might just take a wait-and-see approach. Do you gain traction with any other corner? What do you think about Krim's senior year? And then just there's not a Shamari Earls out there to just go we'll just go get this guy, because number one, there's not many out there like him. He's a 5-star. And then number two, at this point, if you aren't already involved with the guy, it's going to be pretty hard to get involved and get in the game. So I think it's going to be kind of a wait and see approach to that. I do want to say one more thing, Wes, on Earls, just to be fair, make sure we're telling the whole story with a caveat. It was told to me that South Carolina probably won't give up there, and kind of gave South Carolina lost Jalewis Solomon and then got him back. Fair. And I say that just to illustrate that if you're wondering, hey, will South Carolina keep trying to recruit him? I think yes. Also, I don't look at it as a Jalewis Solomon situation, though. Jalewis, you knew that one was back and forth down to the wire. The decision changed a time or two in the last hour or two leading up to the decision, right? And then by the time he flipped back, we kind of knew it was going to happen, right? we knew that Shamari Earls was eventually going to flip to Georgia. We were all kind of sitting here waiting on it. I think it's a much longer shot than anything changes there, but it is something that we might just keep an eye on into the future.
Yeah, I remember sorry, Chris, with Jalewis, it was like instantaneous. Even right after he committed to Auburn, we were already hearing, he's still talking to South Carolina recruits, wants South Carolina to keep recruiting him. And, I remember hearing he was going to flip pretty quickly after he had committed publicly to Auburn. So, like you said, worth mentioning, not worth maybe expecting him to come back to the class, but at least trying to, or at least keeping that in the back of your mind as you move forward. By the way, so Chris, we have not had a show since the change at the director of player personnel position with Taylor Edwards, and that's a spot I want to talk a little bit in general, Chris, before we get out of here. Do you want to inform the fans? I know some people follow this stuff very, very closely, and they already know. Some maybe don't. It's, to me, at any program, and different programs have different names for it now. Some programs split it into two completely different jobs, but are working towards a similar purpose, I should say. What do you think the importance of that director of player personnel, or whatever each team wants to call it, is for a school? Because I think it's one of the most important behind the scenes jobs that exists in college football.
Yeah, I think it's critical. A lot of times in recruiting, you'll hear, such and such coach did a great job recruiting that guy, or he's a great recruiter. And a lot of times that's true. There are very good recruiting coaches, and frankly, there are poor recruiting coaches and everything in between. But especially in the year 2024, that position, and it looks different at different schools in terms of the responsibilities and how it's split up, but that position in that department is incredibly important, especially now with NIL involved, right? And more integrations between schools and NIL collectives. It's very important to have a well-functioning department of people that understand NIL, can build relationships, work very hard at it. If you don't have somebody at the top who knows what he or she is doing there and has a team under them that knows what they're doing, it's tough. And I'll be quite frank, when you don't have a DPP, a director of player personnel, or something like that, which South Carolina is in that spot right now, the longer it goes, there is somewhat of a gap there, because that person and the people under them typically are building lots of relationships. They're very involved in visits. They're involved in phone calls and texts and face-to-face. Again, with the integrations between schools and collectives, a lot of times they're involved in some of that, depending on the state law, depending on the place. And so it's a critical position. And I think it's a very, very important hire for Shane Beamer. And I do think, I mentioned that gap and them not having one. I don't think that will last very, very long. We're not going to be sitting here in August saying who's the next director of player personnel going to be.
Yep, no doubt, man. All right, we're going to get out of here. Good stuff as always, Chris. For our friend Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com, 803-422-6797. I'm Wes Mitchell. We'll, I know Mike has already set a show for Tuesday. I think we'll try to hop back on if possible on Wednesday, and then we will go from there. Next week, SEC Media Days, so will be plenty going on then and plenty new to talk about as well. All right, y'all. Appreciate it as always. Y'all have a good one. Be sure to check us out, as always, on GamecockCentral.com on the message boards. And if you're not a subscriber, try the code SCAR1, $1 for 2 months if you're not a Gamecock Central subscriber. Until next time, y'all.